and welcome to a tutorial to walk us through on how to gather consent and related data with XcooBee. We will walk through a fictitious scenario that has 3 participants: prudent company, which will be the organization gathering our initial data. We'll look at how they do so and how they set up their environment. Zolma Jones, that will be our consumer. Nolma will provide the initial data and subsequent data to prudent company, and Doris Little company will be a recipient of a transfer of data that will have information from Olmor as well. So we are going to get started. We are starting with prudent company. And here we are in their basic dashboard. There are a few views on dashboard. We're going to switch to the consent view by tapping on this here so we can see all our consents if we have any in progress, and obviously we don't have anything. We can expand our view to get more features by clicking on the company gears here and selecting the advanced area. We are not going to really address many of these things, but the transaction house is also our consent hub, which is a gauge that will tell us overall how we're doing in consent management across all of the campaigns and all of the data we're managing. Since we're not having any data at the moment, it's going to stay at the starting position here. I'm going to simplify our view by taking advanced off again. We are going to go into consent administration, and our consent administration area is where we manage all consent and consent gathering operations. All consent and data are grouped into campaigns. Campaigns are a higher level grouping mechanism where we are managing multiple elements into one bucket. So here we have the options when we are new to either create an advanced campaign, which we will do, or creating a cookie. And we're talking about consent. Most of the time, people may think about cookie consents that are website related. That is also supported within XcooBee, and there's a different video altogether. We are going to focus on an advanced campaign, which actually is more flexible with privacy forms and their constructions of data sets that we want to gather. So we're going to click on this and we will start a wizard. We will have a name for our campaign and basic other information. So we are going to say info needed. We can provide an exit URL, in this case, prudentcompany.com. This is an interesting area where we have multiple options. We can only handle the consent metadata, but we also can request consent as well as the underlying privacy data that we want to manage. Here we are going to do both. We have different types of directions in terms of how the data comes to us. We are going to say, in our case, it's an inbound campaign, but we can also combine these. Inbound campaigns are things that we really place on websites, or we may have passively on paper forms where people can start the interaction with our campaign and the related data processes. Outbound campaigns can be managed also by the system. This involves emailing to participants and asking them for data, or validating existing data if you already have it in your organization and I'm not quite sure whether you already have all consents. This is a way of gathering those consents and documenting them. We're going to just give it a small description. We need data to handle service you requested. We can obviously specify multiple languages for the same description. XcooBee in general allows you to specify languages when you interact with your end customers so that they can receive information in the languages that they're familiar with. We're going to go to the next step, which is the actual data that we wish to gather from our customers. We will set a consent time span. So once we have the data, how long is it valid? How long should the system assume the validity lasts? So it can ask for extensions when necessary. That happens automatically when we near expiration. In our case, I'm going to say 2 years. Why not? The question is, what type of data can I gather? These are already predefined data elements. We can put them into different form sections. We really are combining a dynamic form here. We keep it simple in our case. We're going to say first name, we're going to have a last name and an email that we want to manage. So I should actually just put it in the right place, and an email here. And there we have it. Maybe order it a little bit. We can set up all kinds of information or changes to this. For example, we can provide a section name, and then we can say basic info for your form. We can have rules relating to each of the entries and the combination. So we can build fairly dynamic forms here by using some element called mapping, where we can have input mask rules and so forth. We're not going to go into this at this point. We're just going to go back and use the basic information, basic patterns that the system is already familiar with. We can also expand that quite a bit. There are data pieces that XcooBee will be able to gather that it's not able to read. XcooBee in general as a network is able to work with keys that customers provide. So if you don't want XcooBee to read any of your data, it's fairly simple. You provided the encryption key that you want to use, and keep obviously your private key component of it. And then we will be able to gather the information for you without any insight. We can gather all kinds of information, including if you wish for people to drop in files and transfer it to you in a secure manner without having any insight into it as well. The other things that can be done is, as we are transferring data from a consumer or from another company to you, accessing to it, as the XcooBee network moves from A to B, you can actually have a stop point in and have processing done on the network. That's a network compute element that's available as well. But in our case, we're just going to simply gather data. So we're going to say first name, last name, and email. What is the predefined? We have predefined scopes here. We set perform a service, so we're going to ask for perform service. We can ask for multiple permissions and uses of data at the same time. To keep it simple, we will ask for one. The users only interact with the forms that we generate one time, so it's fairly easy for them, even if you ask for multiple uses of data. We have the campaign callback URL, which is important for all the integrations, because all the data that we have gathered for you and are unable to read will be presented back to your systems via a concept called webhook push, which is basically giving you an encrypted data set for you to read once the user has given us the data. We will be able to target this to any of the available online endpoints that you have exposed, but there are also patterns where you can receive the data without having to expose anything on the internet. There are many options here. We are not going to make changes to any of them. The one thing that I want to point out is, if you do not want to touch the data yourself and or host it yourself or store it yourself, you can actually store it on XcooBee in an encrypted pattern where XcooBee is not able to read it, but you can retrieve it at any one point that you wish in the future. Using your keys, you can read it, but XcooBee can be the secure data host of any data that you gather if you wish us to do so. Any of the labels that we produce on forms in the privacy form area can be changed by the user. So this is all the stuff that we put on by default. You can change any of it to any of the languages you support. And then we are done. So the only thing that we have really worked on is setting things in general in data and scope, and we left everything else on the default side. We are ready to activate the campaign and gather data from end customers. In order to do so, I'm just going to tap the Activate Campaign button. It's done, and all the servers have the information that they need. We have multiple ways of how to use our campaign. We can just create a URL, give it to people when they click on it. For example, on social media posts, they get a privacy form. If we want to embed it in your website via a link or a button, that is possible. We have also a QR code generator that will allow you to generate QR codes for paper forms as an alternative. if people wish to fill in the XcooBee form instead of a paper form, that's very quickly possible. We can also do embedded buttons as well as create embedded forms for websites. All these will produce either a script tag or a embeddable element that you can provide to your webmaster. Links are easier for us for direct interactions, so our QR code. So we're going to use the URL going forward when we use our end customer. So we are going to activate our URL generator. As you see, the base URL is like this, and we're looking or working with our test system, so it will look different on production. And we can also add a source tracking. If you, for example, have a marketing type of element here, we could say article name, or let's just call it art. If I could spell this, article or something, so that you know whenever somebody clicks on this that they are interacting with this form. We're just going to click or tap on this little icon here, which copies our information. Use it directly. Now we're going to switch roles, and we are going to be the end customer, and we are just going to paste the link that we have received. In our case, I'm already logged in as Olmar, so when XcooBee recognizes that there's a login that exists, it will already allow the end user to interact with their name and so forth. So we know that Prudent is the business. So here we go. It's a basic form that will render correctly on all devices, including mobile phones and tablets. It is giving you a few things that are not common. Example, a security image here is available to all XcooBee users that have an account, so that you can recognize that wherever we're rendering this from is a legitimate and validated requester of information. This has already been filled in based on our account data that we have for you. So, and the allowed use of data is also already displayed to you in a clear fashion. We want to perform a service, P&L business, we need to handle your data, all these things that you've seen, we enter in our campaign. I'm going to say save my data for reuse, and I'm going to accept this request for data from Olmar. So it's very simple for a consumer to interact with the consent request in a meaningful manner, in a very clear pattern. So here we are. We see that the campaigns that are currently running for Prudent, there is actually in this particular campaign that we just created, we have actually a very specific gauge here that tells us that we're doing well here because it's green. For general consent administration, if we wanted to perform anything here, we can go and task and see if there's anything that we need to pay attention to. And in this case, we won't have anything because everything looks good. We can look at specific consents. Here's Olmar Jones giving us that data set that we asked for. We don't have direct access to Olmar's data through XcooBee here in this level, since we would have to decrypt the data package that Olmar has supplied as part of the interchange. And that normally happens through a little program or through our use of the JavaScript SDK that we provide for easy access. Let's walk through a common scenario. How do we exchange data in a compliant fashion? When you use the XcooBee tools, it's fairly simple. You just use the share icon, whether it's an individual consent like this or a whole campaign. It's as simple as clicking on this little share icon, and we need to then supply a target campaign reference. This is basically any campaign run by any entity, whether it's in a subsidiary or any other company that you wish to supply this data for fulfilling some sort of service or any other thing that needs to be happening between entities or companies. In our case, we will supply this particular target campaign reference and click on process sharing request. XcooBee will then do all the work that is necessary, whether it's 1 or 10,000 consents that you need to share. We'll go back out and make sure that we have permissions to do so, assemble a clean packet that can be shared, and do the share if possible. So when we look at Almar, who is our free user really, that was able to initially share his data, he actually sees another request in his inbox. So there you see there's a little mail that came in. He would see that either in his regular email, so he can come from there, or he would see it when he goes to the XcooBee inbox. He would see that we have a request. In our case, the request seems to come from a different company called Doris Little, because Doris Little Company is the target campaign that wishes to use Almar's data, and for which Prudent Company has initiated the share. So we're just going to open and see what this is all about. There we go. As a consumer, when I open a share request, I would see that Prudent Business, who I might have given my initial consent and data to, wishes to share my data with Doris Little Company. It will have information that I can pre-fill here. I can make changes or give some alternate or change data to Doris Little. In my case, I'm just going to say this all looks good. I'm going to accept it. And when I do so, Doris will get a copy of my data. This is the information that is basically standardized, and Doris has entered, Doris Little Company agents have entered when they set up their campaign. We are looking at campaigns for Doris, and I'm just going to look at consents. And we'll see that Almar Jones actually just came in as an additional consent that and data that is available to Doris. And if we just have a brief look at what is in the package from Almar, we can just look at this real brief. And we see that we have a first name, last name, and email, and when the approval date happened. Let's go back to Almar one more time now and see what his live or screens look like when he makes changes. Data changes over live, and XcooBee will allow all participants to facilitate or have an easy way of exchanging data even after the initial consent. Here we're back at Almar's dashboard, and as you can see, he can actually also see all the consent that he has given over live to all companies and open up the information by just tapping on the particular buttons. Here we can see when he was created, when it was approved. When we look at the original one, we can also see when transfers happen of the data. So for example, we know that I've given this consent at this time and it was approved, but I also allowed a transfer of this consent to another entity. And when I click on it, I obviously open the other one. But in this case, we actually have two active consents. I'm going to go back here and say, let's say my email changed as Almar and I want to update both of these companies. I don't have to go to each of them individually. We're just going to look at what data I have available and have shared. I save data. I see that I have at one point shared 3 different data elements, my email, my first name and last name. Let's say my first name changes. I can first have a look at who I gave my first name to. In our case, there are 2 different entities that have my first name. If I wanted to change it for all of them in one shot, I can do so here, or I can individually take actions if I like. Here I'm going to go and I'm going to say my first name is no longer Almar, but I can also say it's maybe Tolmer. So my first name changed. I can either just save it and then, or save and update all. I can also let XcooBee know to expire this data point. All data that XcooBee ever gathers has an expiration. So this is where some of it is exposed. And when the data expires, we automatically from the XcooBee side will delete it. But here we go. And so all the consents that I have out there with valid data will now have received an update package that I changed my name from Ulmer to Tom. So very convenient for end consumers to manage all the data, have a great insight into whom they have shared the data with, control all the consents in terms of their timing, and also communicate effectively with the particular organizations. And we have many tools where organizations and individuals can communicate regarding their data and resolve conflict and disputes. So that way we reduce costs, and rather than having any lawyers involved or any complaints being filed with managing organizations or deal with supervisor authority complaints, they can be resolved most of the time between individuals here and document for both sides what has happened, who has your data, and why. Thank you again for listening to this presentation of the consent management platform from XcooBee. There are many other components that we haven't had time to go through, including how to manage with large organizations, looking at APIs, SDKs, as well as some of the other patterns that are available inside the platform. If you want to get your hands on a quick and easy way to go to the XcooBee.com website, click on the login here, create an account that is free. We would recommend that you go to the privacy forms and data transfer section and create a professional account, which has most of the things that we looked here available to, and you should be able to get a good idea of what can be done before upgrading to any other level, including enterprise. For enterprise and custom codes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via our support email or our support numbers published on our website. Thanks again.